Good morning, everyone. Let's get started. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here today for our first session of the day here. This panel is called LGBTQ plus Entrepreneurs Are Reshaping the Economy. We'll be starting this panel with some quick self-introductions. We'll jump into a couple of prepared questions and we'll just see where the discussion takes us. And then we're going to wrap up with some audience Q&A. So feel free to write your questions in the chat and our moderator will be popping them up. Just to introduce myself, my name's Irene Tang, and I am the panel moderator today. I'm the program director of the StartOut Pride Economic Impact Index, where we measure the contributions of LGBTQ entrepreneurs as we figure out how we can support policies that will reduce achievement gaps for LGBT founders. So next, I'll pass it off to my right, Nicola. Please feel free to introduce yourself.
Thanks so much, Irene. It is an honor and pleasure to be here today. I'm Nicola Corzine. I'm the founding executive director, CEO of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. We are an independent 501c3 nonprofit started now 7 years ago with a commitment to really democratize entrepreneurship. And really now more than ever, we need all entrepreneurs contributing and building into this solutions that are needed in the world. So in the last 6 years, we've worked with more than 52,000 entrepreneurs from 120 countries. 50% female, 64% marginalized. And we really find now more than ever that our entrepreneurs are saying to us what they need built out in the community to be successful as entrepreneurs. So looking forward to sharing some of that and of course, learning from all of the panelists here today. Thank you.
Todd, you're next.
Thanks, Irene. Hi, everybody. I'm Todd Sears. I'm the founder and CEO of Out Leadership, and nice to see Nicola and Vivienne as well. Vivienne, it's been a long time since we've been in person, so it's nice to at least be on a Zoom with you. I'm, I guess, a serial entrepreneur myself. I started Out Leadership 12 years ago. I'm a recovering banker. I spent the first half of my career on Wall Street. I was an investment banker and a private banker, where I started the first team on Wall Street to focus on the LGBTQ community back in 2001. Half of my book of business was nonprofits, so I managed the endowments of HRC, Lambda, Bliss and Glad, et cetera. And the other half were gay couples all over the country. And that led to Merrill Lynch actually supporting LGBT equality from a business perspective, which I then took to Credit Suisse, and then ultimately starting Out Leadership 12 years ago with the idea that business should and could drive LGBT equality. So Out Leadership is we were the first LGBTQ B Corp. We're still the first and only global LGBTQ B Corp. We have summits in New York, London, Hong Kong, Paris, and Sydney. We have 92 companies that are members, about 750 CEOs we work with, and about 30,000 business leaders through our summits, as well as our talent initiatives for young gay leaders, for women, and for board leadership. And we were proud to partner with the NASDAQ, for example, on the recent win with the SEC filing. NASDAQ and Out Leadership worked together for a year to make sure that board diversity is LGBTQ inclusive. And I know we'll talk about that today. So proud to be here. Thanks for all the work that all of you are doing, and excited for this conversation.
Thank you. Vivienne?
It's sure enough my turn. I've been a lot of things. I have been a neuroscientist and an AI researcher. I have been a mom, and I've started companies in education and workforce health. I just started my 6th company in that space, been the chief scientist at a few others. StartOut had the misfortune of having me as their chair for a couple of years until a relatively bloodless coup brought sanity back into the world. But during that time, we were able to launch the index, the StartOut Pride Economic Index. And something, in fact, that got me to join the board in the first place was the idea of let's understand what's actually going on in our community in a way. You know, we started to jump right in here, but we had a couple of years where we ran a congressional event in DC, and it was great. And StartOut and a variety of other groups had the chance to get together and be there with members of Congress who I've had the chance to have a lot of conversations with. And the number one thing they asked for is, give us data, give us some answers to questions so that we can go out and really fight for the kinds of policies that will make a difference in the world. And unfortunately, every marginalized group could use the kinds of people on this call fighting for them, absolutely, and they have them. But because we have not been a federally recognized protected group, most organizations have felt that there isn't a need, whether they're governmental or NGO or corporations. There hasn't been a need to collect this data and track it. So we're finally have the chance to both say what's amazing and what could be better. And there's a lot of things. All right, I'll be quiet now.
All right, thank you. Thank you everyone for introducing yourselves. We'll jump right into the first question, which is kind of a little bit about yourselves and what you're doing. All of you do amazing work to help empower the LGBT community and our economic impact. So what's been the most satisfying or exciting part of your role as leaders in your organization? So feel free, whoever wants to jump in and answer these questions. Not everybody has to answer everything, but we can also kind of make it a little bit of a discussion as well.
Well, I guess I'm happy to start from the standpoint of I am looking forward to learning from the other two even more so mine will be brief. I'm the daughter of an entrepreneur. I always start by saying that because I was born in England, and when my dad moved us out stateside, he moved us to America because he believed that this was a country where everyone had a chance to start and build a business. And that was always this incredible construct that I had growing up. When there was a problem, I was encouraged to lean in and think about building a solution. And as I was in school with many different types of individuals, I realized not everyone had that same opportunity stack that I'd been encouraged to sort of see as an opportunity and a bit of an obligation with inside of my family unit. And then I thought, what more might be possible if everyone had that same opportunity and that same environment. And over time, and I did 3 startups myself for a variety of different reasons, some greatly successful, most of them not. The ones that weren't definitely always teach you more than the ones that were, but each and every step of the way, there were people that were leaning in to say, how can I help? And that commitment to sort of seeing how lucky I was and how fortunate in this pay it forward mentality of entrepreneurship with an abundance mindset, the world would be much more enriched if we could do that and have others that were out there sort of solving and shaping the world for the inclusivity of everyone. And that treatment wasn't available to all. And that because those stories were being left behind, there was so much more that was missing out there. So fast forward to sort of where we are today and now seeing a much more invigorated environment where solutions are being encouraged, where innovation is no longer in one central hub. I'm in the Bay Area, and nothing makes me happier these days than to realize the vibrancy of innovation worldwide and how entrepreneurs are learning from one another, from their different experiences, from their different outputs, and we're starting to track and trend better the opportunity that lives when all this comes together. So I guess from our standpoint, the things that make me happiest from our organization is a commitment to really building out inclusive data sets. I was thrilled and so delighted with the idea of calling it from that abundance environment of what StartOut is doing to say, this is what happens when inclusivity and equitable entrepreneurship isn't present, especially for our LGBTQ entrepreneurs, and starting to see cities get really excited around that to say, leaning in and say, well, let's change that. We don't want to be left behind. And I hope, and I'm committed at the center and beyond to see more of that come forward full throttle in the next decade. Hopefully it doesn't take that long, but entrepreneurship, sometimes it does take a little bit of time to really have systems level change. So that's us. That's what I'm most thrilled about from my standpoint.
Vivienne, you want to go next?
Oh God, sure. The homelessness and suicide rates amongst transgender and LGBTQ broadly populations are still frighteningly high. In some places, particularly here in Berkeley, it's like you're a boring white picket fence person, pick your pronoun and get a cool hat, like join the crowd. But this is not the case throughout the majority of the United States, even large parts of the Bay Area, and certainly not around the world. And you look at those 2 issues alone, just those 2 issues, suicide rates and homelessness. Well, I've been homeless for a while. And boy, during that time, I came awfully close. I was literally crossing off the days on a calendar. And turns out I was born with a surplus of testosterone that needed a minor correction. And to see how the first half of my life went with all sorts of advantages that were squandered and lost. And then I get to be, and forgive me for those of you who have heard this story before, I get to be the first person to invent an AI for diabetes, the first person to build a system that can predict bipolar disorder. I built a system to reunite orphan refugees with extended family members. My firm belief is that there is nothing special about me. That's not like a backhanded compliment. I'm a self-compliment. I mean it like genuinely, that the world is full of people. And even if for the vast majority of them, all you're doing is getting them off the street because they saw someone, they saw in society that there is a place for them. That alone is good enough. But some of them will go on and come up with a cure for COVID, or invent a company that gives your kids a job. And it is insane that we care more about who someone loves than seeing our own sons and daughters flourish.
Totally agree with that, Vivienne. I think that, one, thanks for your vulnerability and sharing that story. And I also think all of us, it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that the work that we're doing does reach all the marginalized communities, right? The Williams Institute data from just a couple of weeks ago in terms of the disproportionate impact that our community suffered from COVID, and we still suffer food insecurity all the way through to homelessness and joblessness. And too often our data is all about the gay white guys who are on the coast who donate big dollars to events, and that sort of skews the scales in terms of how we're represented. We just did a meeting with the House Financial Services Committee this morning, and specifically talking about diversity, and LGBTQ folks are still left off the list, which I know we're going to chat about. But I think to the question, Irene, that you raised, for me anyway, it's the opportunity to use this platform that I've built globally, not just in the US. So when our Leadership Summit was in Asia, our very first summit 9 years ago, it was the first gay summit in Asia. And when I had the CEO of HSBC and the CEO of Barclays co-hosting the first gay summit in Asia as straight allies, the impact that made when HSBC turned the building into a giant rainbow was the single largest press event they had anywhere in the world that whole year. And that sent a message to all of the Asian countries where a lot of LGBTQ people are marginalized or killed, that this was a business issue and the business was taking it seriously. And that's something I'm very proud that we've created globally over the last 12 years, that these companies and leaders are using their platforms, because in 67 countries, we're still illegal in one way, shape, or form. And in a quarter of those countries, you can be imprisoned or killed. But in all of those countries, we do business. And so my framework is, if the companies that are members of our leadership or that support StartOut or any of our community organizations can then be held not just accountable, but supported in using that platform. And that's kind of what I look at our role is we really are sort of connecting the dots for them. I'm never the guy that's going to hang them out to dry and say, you screwed up here, et cetera. I'd be the guy that will have the conversation with them privately and say, here's how you could improve it. And do you realize that the economic power you have in Singapore, if you collectively look at the fact that Singapore's GDP is 19% financial services, if 100% of financial services that makes up that 19% says that LGBTQ people should be able to live and have their spouses recognized for visa purposes, then you'll start to see change. And so that's something I'm very proud that we get to do. That's what keeps me going and gets me up in the morning. And there's a whole lot of work to do, but the progress is really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to see all the progress that we've been making. I got a somewhat related question, which is like what are some of the biggest challenges you've seen in your role? I know a lot of us have talked about how we can use data to make economic decisions. So kind of going off that, like, what are some of the biggest challenges in terms of how to really take your knowledge and spread that to the greater community? And how have you used research in order to really show maybe some of the gaps that we've experienced, or show some of the amazing research that you've all done and share it with our listeners today?
I'm happy to jump in. So let me go, just a really concrete example of a challenge. One of the entrepreneurial successes of my life was this company called Guild. We were one of the first doing AI in hiring. And it was heady. Like, we ended up on the cover of the New York Times and the Atlantic. It was all so cool, headed towards an IPO. We built this amazing system. I am still proud of it, given all of the challenges of making unbiased AI in this world. I'm still proud of what we piloted there. which would include explainability. We tell you why you should hire this person. Our whole point was diversify hiring. The only reason we existed, the reason a lot of companies paid us a lot of money was that. And then we ran our user testing. There's 100 years worth of research about hiring, and it goes like this. You get 5 seconds and they look at your name, your school, and your last job. Needless to say, we all know what name is about. Now we have this amazing system that people have paid a lot of money to make use of. It's going to change everything. People opened up, recruiters using our system, opened it up to look at someone's profile, and they looked at their name, their school, and their last job, and ignored all of the research, all of the fancy UI we had built. It was heartbreaking to have put so much effort in, and to have the leadership in the companies take this big risk of supporting us and buying our product, to then see, for at least 2/3 of our customers, it didn't change anything because they weren't interested in changing. And I think that's one of the things we have to understand here is data is powerful, and creating these opportunities is powerful, but it takes a lot to shift. I think it was Nicola mentioned making change, systemic change. Anyone who's ever gone out and pitched a venture capitalist understands these largely dudes have a pretty fixed idea about what a successful entrepreneur looks like. And I'll tell you from experience, it's not me. So I assume it's the freckles. So, trying to break those bad habits takes an enormous amount of engagement, and you can't just take easy wins and think you have the problem solved.
I would just jump in on a couple of quick things. I think one, the systemic change that both of you are speaking about, in my experience anyway, has several sort of layers that we're trying to get at. So the data piece, and I'll post in a couple of pieces that leadership has done around trans, for example. So we published the Business Leaders Guide to Trans Equality about 4 months ago. We partnered with 8 different trans organizations in the US to educate business leaders on what they needed to know and do about all the anti-trans legislation across 31 states, right? 167 bills, I think. As just one example, because it literally is it's not just insidious, but it's overwhelming. And so the challenge there is keeping up with it. But equally, the challenge is apathy, in my opinion. I think too many people, even in our own community, have decided or felt like, well, marriage equality solved the problems. And our allies very much felt that, which, people that are homeless or experiencing homelessness or joblessness don't really care about marriage. They care about actually not being homeless or having employment, and not being able to be fired from that employment because of religious objections or the religious right to discriminate, which still very much exists and is getting more and more codified at the state level, but also globally. So I think that is a big challenge. The second is making sure, and I mentioned this briefly with the NASDAQ piece, which is a great example of success, is too often LGBTQ people are still not considered in the definition of board diversity or diversity broadly, which makes me bananas. I mean, our leadership just submitted a 12-page letter to the Financial Conduct Authority yesterday of the UK, because they are doing the similar thing that the NASDAQ did. They're trying to sort of understand what board diversity should look like for regulated organizations in the United Kingdom. Well, guess what wasn't included in the list of diversity for the entire FCA, which is like the SEC for the United States? LGBTQ. We were, as a sidebar and afterthought, something for the future, they said. Sexual orientation and gender identity should not be part of the things that we count as diversity because it's too hard to capture, privacy concerns, all kinds of things that are basically dated 20 years ago. And what we have all found, I'm sure from StartOut's research and Vivienne and Nicola, LGBTQ people do want to self-identify. We found in prior research that we were allowed to at every other level of organizations, 2/3 of the Fortune 500 in 38 countries. So for organizations or indices or regulators to say that at the board level, which is the highest of all these organizations where change and systemic change happens, that we don't want to self-identify or that we shouldn't be part of diversity is patently wrong and ultimately misleading and self-defeating from a diversity perspective. And so that's one of my big challenges is how do we do this globally? How do we, and it's much like the trans bills, they just keep coming, right? The bill that was introduced to Congress 4 or 5 months ago about board diversity, once again, didn't include us. Pension funds don't include us in the definition of diversity for their investment mandates, which we've been able to change. We got CalPERS, CalSTRS, New York City, New York State 6 years ago to add, but there are so many pension funds that don't. I spoke with the California insurance commissioners. It was actually this is the most exciting totally boring. I'm so glad it was not in person conference ever. It's the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. You want to talk about a party, right? And they were all talking about diversity. And the two prior panelists that spoke only talked about race and gender to the entire insurance commission. And I thought, so I of course, when it came my turn, I said, hi, gay guy, we count, like we're right here. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us to use the platforms, the intersections that we have to start to raise that and make sure that we are included, because if we don't count, then we don't count.
I can only add into that, we have been fortunate to, we have been able to tackle with some incredible partners, including those here, a couple of wicked problem territories surrounding the flow of capital to marginalized communities, as well as looking at the challenges facing pay, ownership, and valuation. And time again, to unfortunately Todd's point, when you get a group of people together, it's not always the conversation that goes to LGBTQ being included in those. And then you start to go, well, okay, let's see how bad it is. And unfortunately, there is usually a dearth of data that can be pointed to quickly and easily to say, how are valuations affecting LGBTQ entrepreneurs? It's not showing up in our usual sources, right? And then you look at the numbers being so very small. Unfortunately, it will improve. We all know it will improve. It has to improve. But that being said, it becomes this cyclical nature where they're like, well, the returns, are they really as good? And you're like, well, that's because the data set is so small and we need to change that. Like, this is not acceptable behavior, people. But it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy a little bit in a really bad way, where the lack of data begets more lack of data, because people are like, well, we're not really sure it's meaningful yet, which is why the criticality of this index. I'll just triple down on that, and not just this index, but other indexes emerging and prioritizing and showing the abundance of opportunity, not the scarcity of, well, if that is prioritized, then what isn't prioritized, which is just bonkers and bananas. I'm going to use Todd's word again, bananas in this space. Entrepreneurship is all about more, not less. And so how do we really prioritize the more and the opportunity stack that really lives in front of us, and making sure the lack of data is no longer an excuse that befalls the reason why behavior and systemic change does not occur, because that's not okay anymore. It's just not okay.
If I can support all of that with some parallel research we've done that wasn't specifically about queer populations, but it turns out it generalizes. It's this whole piece I wrote titled Represent. And I read a lot of economics papers because I find that fun. So now you know what kind of a person I am. And it's almost like a rite of passage for labor economists to write a paper about wage gap. And you can look at racial wage gap and gender wage gap. There are a few papers on wage gap in LGBTQ populations. And there you really got to break it up. It's a different story for every letter in the alphabet. But there's not a lot. But there is a bit there. But almost all of it, particularly with gender wage gap, comes down to this story. Women choose to work fewer hours than men. And that ultimately drives the wage gap. Could be because they're raising families, could be all sorts of things. But there's this thing, this men are for Mars, women are for Venus. That's just the way it is. So if you're a progressive economist, you say make more family-friendly policy. If you're a conservative economist, you say this is the way it ought to be. Doesn't matter. They all come to that same. And I always thought, this is crazy. Are we saying that women are somehow irrational, or Blacks or gay people just make choices that are bad for them? Why would that be? So we built this system, a bunch of little AIs crawled across the websites of 60,000 companies, covering all the biggest companies all over the world. And I will go straight to the punchline here. The number one thing we found with gender wage gap, the number one, if you just looked at the most predictive variable, it was the number of female faces on the leadership team, board, C-suite, particularly CEO, CFO, that sort of role, but all across the entire leadership team. If there were more women, the younger women chose to work more hours and looked very much like the men, and wage gap was much lower. So this magical thing, it's not our fault, it's women. It's not our fault that Black guys don't want to work here. It's not our fault that trans people don't feel welcome at Netflix. It is, are you building an environment in which people can see that their hard work will pay off. And if there are no openly queer people on your board, or making executive decisions inside your organization, then what do you think the story is you're telling them? It isn't corporate responsibility. It is a rational choice to show that everyone has a place at our company, because it is not unreasonable to assume large populations of your employees are likely gay, lesbian, trans, or even if they haven't come out yet, even if they haven't gone through transition, like, show them that they have a place and they will choose to step up as a result. So there's this real self-interest in this process that, really, I'd love hearing companies painting their buildings in colors, especially in a place like Hong Kong. Next step is visibility across the board, because it is the right choice to make. It will take more time, but you'll reap the benefits of that effort.
Yeah, does anybody else want to add to that? I want to make this like an open discussion where people can talk about, Todd, you mentioned that you're looking at board diversity. Do you want to maybe share a little bit about that?
Sure. I posted in the chat our visibility counts. There are two different pieces we've done. One was self-ID about broader employee base, and that we published almost 4 years ago, because I got pissed off because I heard so many companies saying, oh, you can't ask those questions in insert country here. And I'd say, well, I know 10 companies that do, but there wasn't a guidebook for it. So we built one. And we found out that companies ask LGBTQ employees to self-identify in 38 countries with another 18 on the way. And a quarter of those, well, to a third of those, it's still illegal in one way, shape, or form. So it does not correlate that if a company is doing business in an LGBT unfriendly country, they still can't understand who their population is. So it kind of goes to Vivienne's point in terms of visibility and how that matters. And it also allows these companies to then be advocates. So painting your building is exactly, that's a nice visibility thing, but then what do you follow it up with, and how to use that economic power that you have? So HSBC, for example, was a part of a 62 company coalition that we worked with community business on to advocate for same-sex spouse benefits, which we ultimately won for the Court of Final Appeal in Hong Kong, but that was 2 years later. So it was literally like the building blocks of, you got to show up first, then what do you do, and what's the expectation? On the board front, there are 5,670 board seats in the Fortune 500, and by our research, there are 27 of them that are held by out LGBTQ people. Of those, 0 are LGBTQ people of color, and only 2 are women. And of those seats, 4 are held by some of the same people. So people have 2 or 3 different seats. I think my colleague Matt Fuss coined a phrase that you're more likely to be struck by lightning than get a Fortune 500 board seat, because the turnover is less than 2%, because we don't have term limits in the United States. The UK and the FTSE and other indices globally do have required term limits for their regulated industries, but we do not. So it is about the visibility. It's about being in those rooms. It's about having access to the people that make decisions, because still boards are chosen by who you know on the golf course or who you know in your sphere. And so LGBTQ people and broader minorities don't always have access to those spheres and those spheres of influence. So it's about broadening that pool, but it's also about making sure that there are only 19 companies out of the Fortune 500 now that include LGBT in their board definition of diversity. When I started Quorum 7 years ago, there were only 2. So we've gotten 17 to change. So that's a massive percentage increase, but a pretty small absolute increase. So we have a lot of work to do on that front. That's actually why the NASDAQ work was so important, because that's 3,300 listed companies that now advocate or require LGBTQ inclusive board diversity. But the California law, AB 979, which passed about 1.5 years ago, when that was introduced, that did not include LGBT or Asian American and the definition of diversity for the requirement for California boards. So we had to do some advocacy with a lot of other groups around adding that. So it's this kind of constant piece, and the board piece is the final frontier in some ways from a business perspective. And one of the things that I'm always fascinated by is the impact that it has on the thing that Vivienne started about with the marginalized communities. At the board level, from a business perspective, I think that's how we actually can impact those communities, because the strategy for these massive billion-dollar corporations is set from the board. And if LGBTQ people are in those conversations, the opportunity to direct how those businesses impact change from a doing well by doing good perspective is significant, but it's just beginning.
I'll just throw in super quick here. 3-4 times a year, an executive recruiter comes sniffing around to see if I want to join a board. And the conversations almost always end with them saying, I'm really going to fight for you. Because they know, and I know, that it's not actually going to happen. Because I don't fit the pattern of certainly in private companies, but even in public companies, a lot of companies, but for one or two people, you throw mutton chops on them and it could look like a board out of the Gilded Age. And breaking through that is really hard. And let's say that's the same sort of mentality you see in the venture industry, where all these Stanford frat brothers and HSB grads get out there and say, I'm pattern matching. I've seen so many people. I know who's going to be successful. And strangely enough, they all look like Mark Zuckerberg. So I don't know what pattern they're matching. And as someone who builds machine learning, I'm actually offended by the stealing of our actual technical terms. But let me just say, it clearly isn't me. And the number of times I've had successful companies that required so many, going with less funding to market, trying to make do with good enough opportunities because they couldn't see it. And it's not just the career communities that go through this. I would love for us to break out of this. And let me say this, quotas are like democracy. Democracy is the worst form of government except all the other ones. And quotas are the worst way to diversify your organization, except if someone's saying quotas to you, guess what? Everything else you have tried has failed because, unfortunately, my guess is you probably aren't particularly committed. So don't be in the position where someone starts using that word around you, but having some mandates come down where you have to have a diverse board, to me, is straightforward. Collective intelligence, this is science. Collective intelligence is maximized when the population is diverse. It's been replicated so many times in so many different contexts. It is a fundamental truth of collective intelligence. A team is not, if you're building a team, whether it's a board or just a little product team or what have you, if they're not diverse, then you haven't put the right team together. And we need that same attitude top to bottom.
I agree. It looks like Cindy had a question about what keeps our heart in the game. Any mantras or practices to bring back our faith? I don't know if Nicola, or you and Vivienne, or Irene, you can throw it to Irene.
Yeah, exactly.
Just because you're the moderator doesn't mean you get off the hook.
That's right. You have so much knowledge here too. I'm curious, Irene, do you want to jump in to start?
Yeah, I think interfacing with the community, to me, is a really great way to keep working, just because sometimes if you're working at this like high level where you're just thinking big picture, this is like what I ultimately want to end up doing, but actually having those conversations with people who benefit from your work, I think is really great. Like, I feel like when I talk to LGBT entrepreneurs or prospective entrepreneurs, they're always really excited to hear about the work that we're doing with the index. Like when I talk to people, they're like, wow, that's great. Like, what are some of the policies that could improve LGBT entrepreneurship? And I'm like, that's a great question. I'm currently still researching that. So let me get back to you when I have that answer. But why don't you tell me what things you would like to see potentially might be correlated with positive LGBT outcomes? And I'll write them down because, we need to gather all this different data, talk to different policy holders, do a lot of research. And I think talking to the actual people who benefit from that, like that, I think drives me the most, because on a day-to-day, you're not always doing that user research. You're not always talking to the people who'd end up benefiting from it, because you're just looking at all these data sets and cleaning the data. And it's not always the most glamorous work. But when I think about the big picture, that is obviously great, but actually talking to the individual people who are really interested in hearing the results, hearing how that can maybe help them as an entrepreneur, help them figure out like maybe what types of programs are the most beneficial for them to do, whether it's like trying to, get into an accelerator or hear about some of the other programs that StartOut's running. Like, I think that helps me feel really enthused, like actually talking to the end users who benefit from the work that we do.
Oh, I love that. I was just going to say, I mean, entrepreneurs are just the best soul for the food. Like, it doesn't get better than getting to work beside entrepreneurs. They give you their heart and they let you know in no uncertain terms what they need. So like our organization, we build programs based on what our entrepreneur community asks for. And so we're constantly posting them. What's keeping you up at night? What are the challenges? What are the barriers? What are the obstacles that are getting in your way of building the businesses that you're inspired to? And they share with such honesty and authenticity. And while we can't always have, I wish, the magic wand to fix the problems, we often find that the support that they get in a near peer relationship of sharing and learning and growing from one another and understanding is less about the front of the class experience, if you'll indulge that for a moment, and instead more about finding a tribe of support that can really lean in to say, I understand, or I've got your back, or I'm here for you, or talk me through it. And that's just so inspiring to see how our entrepreneurs pull their entrepreneurial community up with them. And then, you know, I'll say on the personal side, I've got 2 little wild monkeys in my house right now. And they're at an age where they're always asking questions, but they're also like completely pure of bias right now in just the best way. It's like they see everyone as being equally available and supportive of them in their own little worlds. And that mindset is just so rich and empowering for me personally too, to be like, you know, between them and the team that I'm so fortunate to learn and work with each and every day too, going, that's what's possible, right? Like we just got to hold on to that. We just got to nurture that. We just got to lean in and say, that's what we want. Because when that happens, everyone rises. It's a rising moment for all. And I'll get off the soapbox and mommy moment, but like for me, between that and the entrepreneurial lens, I feel so very lucky, so very, very fortunate. And even on the hardest days, they're the ones that make it all seem like the fight's a good fight, to lean in and say, we owe this to you because it matters to all of us.
I'll jump in. For me, it's Out Next, actually. So Out Leadership has a number of initiatives that we have under the Out Leadership umbrella. And Out Next, I started 8 years ago. And it's our emerging talent program. So every one of our companies nominates 3 to 5 emerging LGBTQ leaders from their company. We have a global summit, and then we have summits in each of the regions where we operate globally. As I think I mentioned in the intro, we have about 6,000 young leaders that have gone through that program, which is cool. And the idea is best-in-class leadership development for them, connecting them to each other, connecting to sponsors. But one of the things that I love that we do is a social impact challenge, where we give them a challenge that the community is facing. We have 5 different challenges per summit, and then they break into teams. They basically, it's like a hackathon kind of thing where they sort of winnow it down, and then they actually choose themselves who the winners are, et cetera. And I got to meet with the winning team last week and do like a little group mentoring session. And they're just so cool. I mean, on average, they all come out at the age of 11 or 12. And, you know, for those of us that came out in our, you know, I came out when I was 18, which was young for my generation. Of course, I'm only 25 now, so it's been just a few years. But they don't have the baggage that my generation has, and the generation before me definitely, most of whom, unfortunately, you know, from the male perspective, didn't survive AIDS, right? So there's this gap in terms of mentorship, especially my generation. We can't look up and see other gay men at the sort of 10, 15 years older than we are, because they just don't exist, right? They literally were decimated. And so it's really cool to see these young leaders coming out, understanding their power. By the time they come to Out Next, they've been out for 14 years, which is like bananas to think about. And they're just so excited and switched on. And they fortunately grew up in a world with will and grace and all the other things that we sort of take for granted. And I'm thrilled that they can take some of that for granted. I think that's ultimately what a lot of us have been fighting for, so that they don't have to walk into every room and think about all the things that went before them. So that gets me excited. And not just in the US. I mean, our Out Next Summit, we had 2,500 leaders from 17 countries. And some of the kids had never connected with other out business leaders from an LGBT perspective in a business context. They'd only gone to a bar or a social. And so it's cool to see them switch on and understand that they can be out in their careers and then tie that to their success, which, I mean, that'll get me up from the most challenging day, is just getting to hear those young leaders. So
I'll throw in, my life came in 3 parts. And there was this period where I started with this amazing life, was supposed to win Nobel Prizes, grew up in the pastures of heaven, the title of the Steinbeck book, set literally in the little valley I grew up in, which also happens to be west of East of Eden. So I had this amazing life. And by the time I was 20, I was homeless and hated myself. And then I had this period in the middle where slowly but surely I climbed back out of that hole, and then suddenly had this amazing success as a scientist in this particular case. And yet I still hated myself. So in that first part of my life, external, internal, everything went down, down, down. And then in that second part, externally, everything was going up. But I still felt terrible inside. And obviously I have this wonderful third to my life. How many people get 3 shots to figure it out, or 1,000, because let's be realistic here. The value of that middle period is that I learned that it's not about me, and it's not about my happiness. And I realize I have both an incredibly privileged and incredibly unusual life, but I've had a lot of good fortune. And so I make more than my fair share. And so I take all of it every year, and I spend it on projects like the Inclusion Impact Index, or I get a message from a mom saying, my daughter has 500 seizures a day, please save her life. Or my son, 8 months old, just had a stroke, what do I do? Or our country doesn't know what to do about education policy, or our company, we know we have bias in our promotion system, but we don't know how to measure it or fix it. And if I think my team and I can make a positive difference, I pay for everything. And if it actually works, we give it all away. It turns out it's the worst startup idea of all time. Endless customers, no revenue. I hope I get to do it for the rest of my life. And the thing that motivates me, it isn't so much a mantra, but saying it isn't about me is a big part of it. It is the idea that as scary as the world is right now, and it is, we still, if we appreciate how complex and messy and difficult the process will be, we can still change it for the better. Whether we're talking about climate change or inclusion, or all of the other myriad problems that seem to, genuinely, God, I woke up at one morning in 2020 in San Francisco and the sun never came up. Just an angry red ball in the sky. It was like the end of days. And even in that moment, to believe in your heart, to know that it's true, that if you work hard enough, you can make a positive change. And you, not someone else. I get a lot of people saying, what should we do about these problems? And my immediate response, without meaning to be disrespectful to the person who asked the question, is the fact that you're asking me is what concerns me the most. What are you doing about this problem? Not everyone's either going to have the money to spend nor the time to spend it the way I choose to. Every single one of us can make a difference. And for many entrepreneurs, making a difference can also be a really positive experience in every sense for themselves. Just never make the mistake that you're the hero in a Ayn Rand novel, that it is all about you and you're going to save everyone by shipping them off to Mars. No, you're a part of something bigger. And if we all invest in that future, then we'll get it. But it's how you fight for that future, not what you're fighting for, that actually matters. So just please go out there and believe that you can create a change. Keep believing it. Have a growth mindset about the world because it's true. And you're the one that's going to make the difference. And if I can help, if any of us can, drop a line. That's what we're here for.
That's like a motivational speech before people rally the troops to go the next sports game. that they're about to
Mordor,
do.
we're off.
Wow, thank you so much, Vivienne. I think we might be at time, everybody. I know I wanted to see if anybody, I guess maybe Nicola or Todd, if you have just like one last resource or piece of advice you might want to direct people to, if you want to share. Otherwise, we might wrap up.
You know, all of our education, all of our programs and resources are free. We don't take any equity. We don't charge for anything. We just ask, like everyone here, you continue to pay it forward and pull forward other entrepreneurs who are making a change in the world for good. They're all available online through the programs that we have. Any way that we can help, any way that we can learn from your experiences, we'd be honored to and humbled to. So please, as shared, reach out if we can help in any way.
I would say the same thing, outleadership.com/insights. All of our research and data and our climate index and the CEO briefs that we use, et cetera, they're all there. So please use them and never underestimate the opportunity to be visible and out, because it does change people's minds.
Gotcha. Well, oh, did you want to?
Sorry, I was just going to say, that's one of the most amazing things. You want to make a change? Be visible. That all by itself. What a easy, lazy world this is, that you can affect a better future just by being visible.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for attending. We've got other panels for the rest of the day, interesting conversations. There's an after party as well, so you can meet some of the other attendees or maybe meet some of the other speakers. There's a couple of booths to learn about some of the different sponsors. But thank you, Vivienne, Nicola, Todd, our moderator, Brad. Thanks everyone for attending, and we'll catch you all next time.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody. Thanks.